Went to China with my father. She took him, and before he left, he said, I'm gonna find something I can make $1 million off of. He's like, I'm gonna sell them online. And I was like, what do you know about selling online? This is 2006.
Yeah.
And he's like, nothing, but you're gonna help me. I was not a fan of the design. I didn't know that it was, what it could turn into, but I knew that if I was gonna put any effort at all, then I wanted it to be right.
All right, this is all about you today, David. This building a brand, man.
That's my favorite thing to do.
Yeah.
So
Do you have a brand? Do you have a brand?
I do. I do have a brand. Anson Belt. Anson Belt and Buckle.
How do you spell that?
Anson Belt. You can find us at ansonbelt.com.
And so the Anson Belt thing, the name itself, is not your last name, because I do this a lot actually on accident. I'm like, hey, David Anson.
I get called Mr. Anson a lot. No, so the name doesn't come from my last name. My father actually grew up in Anson County, North Carolina. So I grew up in Wadesboro. And so Anson comes from Anson County. So, and then I kind of like it because it's a little bit of a double entendre where Anson, so father and son. So I kind of like to, if you say it kind of together like that,
yeah.
father, but it really comes from Anson County, North Carolina.
It's like a hidden menu item. And son.
Exactly.
How did this thing happen? I know we were talking earlier the other day, like building a brand, all the different things we want to talk about with some of this, and like how the whole thing happened, because obviously you haven't done belts your whole life. Like, where did this come from and why?
Absolutely. So I've always been told I need a belt. So if you ask anybody back in the day, I needed a belt, and that's because my belts never fit. You're always in between holes. So when my father first called me about this concept and this belt, he came back from Asia. My sister was a travel agent, and this was around 2006 or so. And so she had won a trip to China, went to China with my father. She took him, and before he left, he said, I'm gonna find something I can make $1 million off of. And we laughed, because it's like, who even thinks like that? And then what are you actually gonna find, that you can do that with? And so really had no idea. He didn't even know what he had really until he got back, and he fell in love with this belt. It had a track system. He said the last night when he was about to leave, he was drawn to the store, went straight to the back. They didn't have any sizes. They said trim to fit, so he wasn't able to try it on until he got home. So he got home, he tried it on, and he was like, holy cow,
this is it.
Where's this thing been my whole life? And so he calls me, and he's like, hey, I have this belt. I bought one for me and one for you. I want you to try it. He's like, this thing is amazing. And at the time, and I still have it today, I should have brought it with me. But at the time I was wearing a belt that I'd made all my own holes in. I had bought it too long. And so from the beginning, I cut, kind of the edge off of it, and I rounded it, and I colored it with a Sharpie, and I made all my own holes, and I was just fine. I was in college, and I was like, this will work. And so when he told me about this belt, I was like, okay, I actually need a new belt, and I'm right there with you. I know that, belts never fit right. So he showed me the belt, and I was not a fan of the design, so the design just was not appealing. I didn't think that it was, something. I was like, okay, if we're going to do this, he said, I want to start selling these belts. And I'm like, well, where are you going to sell them? He's like, I'm going to sell them online. And I was like, well, what do you know about selling online? This is 2006.
Yeah.
And he's like, nothing, but you're going to help me. And so, I was like, okay.
He's like, my job's done. I found a product.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll make this thing better.
Yeah. So I knew that the design was not something I could really get behind. So I was like, okay, we got to rethink this design. We got to make it more attractive. Let's make it ours. Let's change a few things that we didn't like. There were certain, things like the latch and how far it inserted into the buckle and little things like that we tweaked and
cheap.
And then the overall design.
Yeah. So the version you got was kind of cheap.
Yeah. So, it really was. It was, it felt like it was kind of too off the shelf, and I didn't want to just, have a product that someone else was selling, in another country, the exact same thing under a different brand. I wasn't just trying to rebrand, what they were already producing. I wanted to take that concept and make it ours and really make it something that was unique to us and something that I could really get behind, because if I was going to put this much into building this brand and building a company, then I really wanted to really believe in it and really to really, really like the product. Wow. So that was something that was so important to me, was the design of the buckle.
So I heard you say something interesting there. You said, if I was going to put so much into this.
Yeah.
What did you think was required back then compared to what you've had to actually put into it?
I didn't know it was going to be this much. I didn't know that it was, what it could turn into, but I knew that if I was going to put any effort at all, then I wanted it to be right, so I didn't want to half-ass it, and I didn't really want to just, okay, we could have just gone with anything that the, manufacturer, sends us as a sample and say, okay, let's put our logo on it and go with it. But I wanted to, I guess, really without even knowing of what I was building, and knowing of the longevity that it could have, I think I didn't even realize it at the time, but I knew that if I was going to do it, I wanted to do it right and from the beginning. And I think that's something that's important to someone that really is building a brand that they really, really care about, and something that they feel like, they really want to put their name behind and they can be proud of. They need to do it right. And you hear this a lot from, people that have built businesses and brands, and they're like, they were so meticulous about all the little details from the very beginning. And that's because they were, building something that they really cared about.
What were some of those, like in the early stage, like when you started, when you had the product, you figured out what the product was going to be. Mm-hmm. Did you start making a list of things that you talking about importance? Mm-hmm. What were some of those things that you thought were important, and how did you start chipping away at that until you felt like, oh my gosh, I actually have a product that I'm selling and I'm a legit business?
Yeah.
Right. Like, what was like your thought process in that for doing that?
I think you think of, what kind of colors do you want to have? What do you want the look and the feel? And honestly, it's changed a lot since the very beginning. Yeah. And if you, just with a lot of brands, you go through these revisions of logos and kind of brand identity and things like that. But I wanted, what felt really good to me at that time, isn't what we have today. And so, I love, what we've kind of morphed into. And what we've transitioned, into with kind of what we have now. Back then, there were so little guidelines, or so little, it was just kind of what felt good. And so, I had a good friend of mine that was a graphic designer to, create the logo, and yep. There were really no standard operating, procedures of how to even shoot e-commerce. So we were shooting on like a velvet. It was in a cardboard box with a lamp and a velvet backdrop. Yeah, and so super distracting, and it really felt luxurious, and it felt premium, and that's kind of what I was going for in the beginning, is that I wanted this to feel like a premium brand. My whole life, I've been interested in brands my whole life, which is kind of, ironic and really actually, but it all makes sense. Ever since I was a little kid, I was drawing and tracing the logos of like skate brands and stuff, in the skate magazines. I just loved the idea of a logo and like how that logo can invoke feelings. Yep. And like how you see it, and like one person can be like, I want that because it has that on it, or they so I loved how brands could, create that kind of culture around, their logo and their identity and their brand. And it always fascinated me. So without really knowing that that's something that I was passionate about, it just kind of fell into my lap, and I was like, okay, I really like this, and I really enjoy this. And this is something that I really, this is something I could make a living off of.
What's the first thing, or the first couple of things you spent money on? Like, was it e-commerce site? Was it photos? You talked about the logo thing. Like, so someone that's out there like really starting that brand and stuff, and thinking about budgets and where do I put money, what are some of the first things you had to do to establish before you really started rolling the business?
Yeah, obviously it kind of started with the beginning of, hiring on my friend to create the logo and to, kind of create that, how's that logo going to look? How's the font and all of those kind of things? Really didn't get as deep into it as we did years later, but that was kind of the start. And then working with the industrial engineer. So that was kind of the first step. And even, with patent attorneys and a lot of people listening to this probably have questions, as far as, is the concept that we use, a patentable, or is it patented? And it's actually an open market concept. So the style that we use, and it's a magnetic style. We researched with patent attorneys and stuff in the beginning. They're like, okay, this has already been sold in open marketplace without a patent, and so it's kind of an open market concept. And so that's what us and a few others use. And so it's that was kind of initially what we went through is, okay, should we patent this? Is this and that was the first steps and kind of and then once we realized, okay, this is an open market concept, and so we're gonna run with it and kind of make it ours and create our brand, and that's what's gonna differentiate us between the next guy. But no, there really weren't any other next guys. Yeah. There were two others doing it at the time, and they've since dissolved. But and there was one other that they came up at the same time as us, and so they're still around. But yeah, there was really no one else doing it.
What are some things that you spent money on that you thought were critical, and then you found out later on that you didn't need to do that?
One thing that probably one of the silliest things that I spent money on the very beginning was this, and we still get kind of reached out by these companies that will, they want to feature you on this news program or this like short kind of, short clips, and they like buy TV time in between, shows and stuff like that, and they fill that, but it's at like 5:30 in the morning on like, but they kind of they wow you with the reach, and so and they kind of, and unfortunately kind of prey on companies that are up and starting, and that they need the exposure, they've got a little bit of traction, and they're like, okay, they're like, yeah, I'll invest $10,000 to do this video. And they came, I flew down to Florida and like filmed some stuff, and, and it was really cool, but it didn't ever go anywhere. It looked good. It was a great, interview, but, it, had probably zero sales. It was really silly, but it was kind of that we need to get out there and really trying to, put the name out there, but it ended up doing nothing. So have to be wary of those kind of things where it seems like there's going to be a huge reach and that, wow, look how many people, but it's like, yeah, but really that's total possibilities of people, and how many people are really going to see it. So, you have to be careful of those that, opportunities that seem like they're going to be huge, and a huge reach. But
so how do you filter those decisions nowadays?
Now I really, I've kind of turned off to anyone that has any kind of opportunity like that. And we get reached out every now and then. I'm like, nope, I've done that. Not really interested. But it's hard. I always say one of the hardest things for me, my job is trying to figure out what to say no and what to say yes to, and what opportunities to go down that, that path. But it's tough. But go with your gut is one of the biggest things, just how do you feel? Do you feel like this should work, and go with your gut? Because a lot of times that's right.
Yeah. Probably more times than not.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah.
What worked? Like what worked, and what would you do again now? Like if you could go back to when you started and kind of where you're at now, like what worked and what would you suggest for people for things that worked? Like if they're looking for ways to get started, what worked and what would you double down on?
Yes, for us in the very beginning, and what really got us kicked off was radio and endorsement advertising. That was kind of, influencer marketing before it was really cool, and so that was having someone that had a large audience and had a reach like that could say, hey, this belt is amazing, and this is why you should buy it. That's really what kicked us off and what started us. And then kind of transitioned once influencer marketing became a thing, once YouTube became a lot more popular, we kind of transitioned into working with actual influencers more within our space. And so, the other guys were kind of morning drive shows. They had a great audience and a lot of really good influence, but they weren't in our niche, which is kind of, in what we kind of fell into and found that, in the men's fashion niche and industry, if people that care about the way that they dress, if they're gonna, accept your belt and accept the style, then everyone else will fall in place and they'll follow suit. But, if you can get people that care about fashion to say, this is really nice, and this is a great concept, this is a great belt, and here are the reasons why you should buy it. We found that really worked well. And people that care about how they dress, they buy more belts than anyone else. They have more shoes, they match more shoes, that kind of thing. So, we really fell into that after radio, got into influencer marketing, and that's really what exploded it because of the reach. These guys have, millions of followers with, the few that we work with, and have had the opportunity to build those relationships with those guys over the last, 6 or 7 years. So
how did you fund it and what did it cost?
So,
and thinking about like that correlating to like your sales at that time, or were you taking big risks? Were you like self-funding here? Were you taking loans out? Like,
yeah, there were huge risks and bigger, and that's one thing, when you're building a brand, you're going to have to take risks. You really are. And it seems like in business these days to move forward in any kind of measurable amount, you have to take some sort of risk. And so, for us, it was going from, spending $0 to spending $10,000 a month on radio. And we hadn't spent, a dime. Everything that we had done since, before that was, word of mouth and just getting, publications and, got in the newspaper or, stuff like that for free. And so this was the first time that we said, okay, we're going to, shell out $10,000 a month. We weren't even doing $10,000 a month in sales, so to some people would say, well, what sense, that doesn't make any sense. You should, go a little bit slower, but it's what kind of catapulted us. And fortunately, we were ready for it. But it was tough. It definitely, I was doing all the boxing up myself. I was doing all the packaging and all the orders and all that myself. So it was amazing. It went from 0, to 100 real quick, with that, but still, it was peanuts to what we do today. But then it was amazing.
So I have an inside look behind the business for a lot of years. You have a partner with your dad.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the challenges and what are some of the blessings of you both having a different vision of or same vision, but a different way of getting there?
Yeah, absolutely. He's much more risk adverse. He definitely, doesn't, although I say that, he's always, he takes the risk, but it's a lot harder for him to understand, the digital world and how advertising digitally, works and the return on that and how that return can be so slim. You can just, sometimes with digital advertising, if you're breaking even, like that's good and that's okay, as long as you're getting that sale and getting that customer, because hopefully you'll make you'll make that back on the back end and after the second sale. But for him, one of the greatest things is that we got to build it together. And so we built this thing from the ground up together. And I speak with him more now and more because I've built the business with him than I probably ever would have, and so every day, phone calls, whereas, unfortunately, if we weren't building that together, we probably wouldn't talk every day. We maybe not even every week. So to be able to, to do that with him and build that relationship with him that, I'll remember forever, and treasure forever is really, really special. But definitely comes with challenges because, we're from two different generations and just, we think different, and just, we just operate different, but that's what makes it work, and so you kind of need that yin and yang. So, if anybody listening, if you have a partner and you guys, hopefully you have qualities that complement each other, because you are strong in one area and that person's strong in another. And that's really what makes it work. And to have someone that, is, saying, hey, let's do this. And the other person says, well, let's think about this and this and kind of can reel them back in or, can just have another kind of, way to look at another perspective, so that's really, that's helped. It's challenging at times. And especially, we'll have knockout, drag out, fights, on the phone, but at the end, it's all, love you and talk to you soon. So it's, it's challenging, but an amazing experience.
Yeah. You think it's made you a lot better company?
Yeah, I think so. I think that, because we both complement each other in different areas. He's, and especially with the finances and that's kind of been, his thing. And he was very, especially in the beginning, really kept me grounded and really, he was really watching the books and it was, we bootstrapped the entire business from the ground up and it was all about, if we're not profitable, then like, what are we even doing? And this was in the very beginning, so he was, if we were doing some kind of advertising and it wasn't a profitable, if we weren't making money, then to him, it's like, what's the point? What's the point? Whereas now it's kind of, you can look at, okay, like, what's the cash flow like? Are we profitable? What's the future, what's coming up, and so like, there are times in your business where you are losing money, each day. But that you have this and this coming up that that gets you back into into the black. So it's that's I think that's important to have, because if you and your partner are just going gung ho or really are just all everyone's agreeing on the same thing every time, then I think it's important to have both different perspectives.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you look at other brands that we saw that were just like skyrocketing, and you're like, oh man, why are we not doing that? And then 2 years later, they're gone.
Yeah,
because things in the market change, conditions change,
yeah.
And if they're leveraged so high that they can't weather it,
exactly, and that's
go away.
It's an important lesson for me, even seeing brands that you almost feel like you're chasing or like you're trying to aspire to be like, and you're like, man, they're killing it. They're just crushing it. Look at these numbers. And but no, they're not, they're going into debt or their things aren't as, as great as they seem. And we're seeing that a lot in e-commerce of, these big, huge unicorn type brands that,
took funding and didn't tell anyone.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, so that to me, the lesson in that was like, okay, the way that we've built it is just slow and steady. And I think that is that's the best recipe. And it's not, it's not easy and it's not fast, But, you know, if you want to build something that's going to last and something that's going to, you know, be here for, you know, hopefully, you know, generational, you know, and that, you know, a legacy type brand or something that you could pass down to your kids, you know, I think it's important to have that foundation, and that takes time. And, you know, if you do it too fast, it's not going to have a strong foundation. So
I think that's a major point you're bringing up, because we hear it all the time with people that are starting brands or doing brand stuff. And like, you know, they think, you know, got a logo, got my brand guidelines. I've done some photo shoots. I've put this out there. I've launched the website. How come I'm not making money?
Yep.
Like why? And so to be clear, like, how long have you been in business? Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
A couple of things I want you to kind of, how long have you been in business? How much have you changed over time to stay valuable? You talked about radio. Now you're heavy on digital. And at what point along that line did you feel, and we talked about this earlier, did you feel like you made it?
Yeah. Gosh. So, you know, in business, we kind of started working on the concept 2006, but, you know, really got established officially with the state, you know, in 2009. And so, you know, been, you know, doing it for, you know, anywhere 15, 17 years, you know, which seems crazy to say. And, you know, but it obviously, you know, wasn't that every day, you know, 24/7. You know, I was working full time for many of those years. And I think that's important to understand, is that it's totally, you know, okay and acceptable to have a steady source of income that is helping you pay the bills as you build, you know, your brand, or as you, you know, build that business that you're, you know, is your passion project, you know. And so for me, that's kind of what I did in my spare time. And, you know, when I wasn't working, or, you know, or with my, you know, wife, and, you know, that, you know, it's before kids and everything. And so, you know, but I was, you know, working on that. Yeah. So you know, been doing it, you know, roughly 15, 17 years. And, you know, as far as like, I mean, I still don't feel like we made it, you know what I mean? And we haven't, you know what I mean? Like we're doing well, but like we haven't made it, you know. Like I want to be a household name, and I want to be, you know, where it's like everybody, when you think of a belt, you think of an Anson belt. So, but there were times definitely where it was like, holy cow moments. And, you know, a few of them, you know, have definitely been like when I see one, like a guy wearing one just out in the wild, you know, and like you walk by and I'm like, that's an Anson. I was in Asheville one time, and it happened, like, this was years and years ago, and I saw it, and I was like, that's our traditional in silver. I was like, I've got to say something, you know. I was like, and I went up and talked to him, and like, ironically, his roommate was on a show that Aaron Marino had done, and got a makeover, and you know, so yeah, he knew about the belts from that. And anyway, but was a big fan. But it was cool to see that, and I've seen that again, you know, a few more times. But it's just awesome. Hearing from people and friends that I know that will like text me, and they're like, I'm out with this guy, and guess what? You know, tell him what kind of belt you have, and, you know, and he FaceTimes me with a guy that's like, you know, I love your belts, you know. And so having friends that are out and about and are talking to somebody, and they're like, oh yeah, I'm wearing one, you know, or they'll text me and they're like, oh, I went to a conference, and, you know, 4 of my guys from work are you know, wearing Anson belts. And so that, when those moments have started happening, I'm like, okay, we're starting to do some things where, like, you know, people are really starting to know who we are. So
yeah, I couldn't tell you how many different groups that I've spoke to and events that I've been at where we talked all about Anson and what you were doing. And so, yeah, and a lot of them come by him.
That's awesome.
Yeah. When did the first hit, like the first sales or whatever, come in, and you're like, man, I think we have something here. Like, you know, like you're obviously hustling. Like, when did, like, what was that dollar amount that came in that you're like, oh man, like, I think we can really sell some belts? Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, the first time that really happened was in, we were living in Raleigh, and it was probably right as we were getting going, 2009, you know, 2010. And I had hired on one of my former bosses to help us with PR. And so she said, okay, David, she goes, there's a morning drive show. It was Bob and the Showgram. And she was like, I'm going to get you in there. She was like, there's a studio audience. There's, you know, 10 to 12 people, you know, every Friday that they let in. She's like, I'm going to get you in there. And after that, it's on you. And so I said, okay. I was like, this sounds like a plan. So I brought 3 belts. I had, you know, back then I was wearing cargo shorts, you know, because we all wore cargo shorts at some point. so I had 3 belts in my cargo shorts, and I was sitting up in this kind of makeshift stage, and I'm sitting up there, and they said, who wants to play a game? And I immediately raised my hand, and I was like, okay. And so they said, you, and they picked me and one other person. And so I was like, all right, this is my opportunity. So, you know, I'm in front of the mic. I'm like, now what, you know, and how am I going to do this? And so we played the game, and then they went to a commercial break, and I was like, all right. So I said, hey, Bob, I said, I brought you guys something, and I showed them the belts. I showed them how it works. It's a micro adjustable holeless belt. Instead of 5 holes, 1 inch apart, you have 30 plus options, a 1/4 of an inch apart. And so showed it to them, and they absolutely loved it. And so they were still talking about it as they came back from commercial break. And so they're kind of in the middle of the conversation, and they're, well, we're back. And they're like, and I'm sorry, what was your name again? David Faree. And they said, and what company? Anson Belt and Buckle, AnsonBeltandBuckle.com. This was back before, you shorten the URLs. So and now we're just AnsonBelt.com. So it was AnsonBeltandBuckle.com, ANSON Beltandbuckle.com. And so, I got to have 30, it was probably, 35, 40 seconds, on the radio. And so I had friends texting me at the time. They're like, I hear you're on Bob and the Showgram. Like, is that you? They're like, they're talking about your belts. And so that was really cool to hear that. And instantly, started getting sales. And I mean, this was, we were doing, 1 sale a month, and it was someone that we knew, and so to instantly all of a sudden have, 10, 15, 20, I can't even remember how many we got that day, but it was like, maybe, 20 something sales, that day just from that spot. And it was like, okay, maybe we're onto something there. I knew we were onto something, but okay, this is actually, this is how we're going to get the word out there. We need to tell a lot of people.
Yeah.
And if a lot of people hear it, then we're going to get some sales. And so that kind of, started us thinking of how can we get that reach out there? And so ultimately, got into radio and work, doing the morning drive show in Northern California. And kind of, long story short, my brother-in-law listened to them. They talked about they needed some belts and sent them some, but they don't want to just talk about them for free. So we became a sponsor. And that was kind of the next step where it was like, okay, so, that's where we went from spending 0 to spending 10,000, a month on advertising. Cause I said, kind of, we saw what it did, when I was on for just, 35 seconds. What if we had a true endorser, somebody that, is really that these people really listen to, tell them about it. So
when you were spending the 10,000 a month, were you recouping 10,000 a month?
So we were probably, we were doing 30,
Nice.
30 or so, a month. And so, it was like $1,000 a day or so, and that was amazing. It was, we went from, maybe, 1 a week to, to 10, to 10 a day. And it was great.
So when did you shift in a major way with Matt and all this other stuff? Like, when did you shift in a major way to digital advertisement, real optimizations of the website, and at what point did you feel like your business was ready for that? And what should a business owner be ready to do, both financially and just everything that's involved with that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, when we were doing that, and we went from nothing to doing 30 or so a month, and we still had our website. I wasn't working with Matt and them at that time. And back then it felt like you always had to keep changing it. You know what I mean? It always felt like you had to be keeping
Something
up.
new.
Yeah. I mean, it was like, it's outdated, in 2 years. So it was, constantly trying to redesign it and keep up with those trends, because it really, it was so hard to get people to shop online back then. People didn't trust. So it was like, they would say, well, I don't know about, breaking out my credit card and entering this online. I'm like, but you'll let the waiter or waitress go around the corner for, 3 minutes and you don't know where it goes. I'm like, so yeah, but anyway, yeah. So it was really hard. And Amazon changed, everybody's mindset with that. But so, we went from, spending nothing to that. And then, worked with a guy to change kind of the whole website into a really, really big revision, logo revision, everything. He's a great designer, but just was not a web designer. And so things were really clunky, really, really not, not optimized. We had a Christmas, and it was just like things, we were trying to do a lot of customization, and things were broken. So that's when I started looking around, for someone to really help, okay, we got to get serious with the web development end of it. And so that, I knew that I needed a partner with that, and somebody that, knows, and everybody listening. I mean, if you have a website and you're not experienced in HTML and in coding and all that stuff, like, you're going to need someone to help with that. So, I knew that I needed a partner like that. And then, as I think everything happens for a reason, and I could go into the whole story of how we met, but it's kind of fate that we did get introduced. And then I knew that, I needed a partner to really help get this thing working right. So took the bare bones of it, fixed everything, and we got, really got rolling. So, as far as going from, working with radio and then saying, okay, that kind of, it really kind of plateaued. And I felt like, we just weren't getting the return out of that. And we just kind of, like I said, plateaued. So we looked at kind of using influencer marketing, and that was starting to be a buzz now. I had a relationship with Antonio Centino with Real Mineral Style from years prior to that. And it kind of kept in touch with him. And he, we were his first video that he ever reviewed online, as far as he says, which is amazing. And now he has, millions of subscribers. But, so I knew that we needed to start getting the word out there to more. Went to a conference with them that they were sponsoring. At the time it was StyleCon. Now it was Minfluential. Moved into that, and it's since they're not doing it any longer. But had met a lot of influencers at that time, and then met with a group, Minfluential, who those guys are kind of partners in, and really made a lot of sense to partner up with them. So again, went from spending that, we basically, pretty much doubled, what we were spending on radio, and started working with them and pumping out as much, influencer content as we could.
Did you use any, I made this much, I'm putting this much money back. Did you use any processes or methods like that for someone out there that's like, hey, I'm an A plus B equals C guy, or are you like a gut guy? Like,
at the time it was, the return was a lot more than it even is now. I think because we didn't have as much, as much tech stack on that. Well, no, just as much stuff as we're using these different companies for all these different things. It was pretty bare bones back then.
Yeah.
So our return was higher. Now we look at, okay, what MER, the marketing efficiency ratio, so how much are we spending on marketing versus how much we're bringing in a day? We know what that number needs to be, where it needs to be. And so we know that we can spend X amount, on marketing overall. And as long as we're making this, then, with our margins and everything considered back then, we were flying, a lot faster and looser. And it was really just kind of like, okay, let's pump this in. But the return was so incredible, in the beginning. And I don't know if that's, I think a lot of that has to do with influencer marketing in general. And people, consumers getting a little more used to or more numb to really, people, just selling them stuff all the time, so this was like 2017, 18, 19, and it really, it just didn't seem like to be as saturated maybe.
Yeah.
But, so the return was enough where it was like, okay, we're making some money. But yeah, but it was, and I was doing all the, I was doing a lot of the fulfillment in the beginning, and then I guess probably 15 went to a fulfillment center, and that's when was able to focus more on the business and the customer service, and that's what I did for up until a couple months ago. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I honestly think that's one of the things that sets you apart. Yeah. Tell the story about what you used to do for every order that came in.
Yeah, so when building this brand, one of the things that was really important to us was the packaging, and it still is, and that's something that sets us apart. And so I knew we really wanted to have this really special packaging, and it was super meticulous to put together. It involved tissue paper. You had to fold the tissue, you had to put it into the box, and we were just getting boxes from Uline and tissue, and so you'd put the belts in there and wrap them into the silk bags, put the silk bags in there, fold the tissue, and then we had a hot, I wanted to do, for some reason, I felt like it just needed this, but a hot wax stamp. And so every order got a hot wax stamp. And so I would, fold the tissue, and I had a glue gun that was just set on ready, all the time when I was doing orders, and I would literally hot wax the stamp for every order. And so I did that up until about a Christmas that, we just had, hundreds of orders, and it got to be too much. And then I started doing them kind of ahead of time, and I would use a sticker on the back, but I would take a baking sheet and make little dots and do the hot wax stamp. But it was so fulfilling to me because I knew that each one of those was like $100 because it was for our box set. So it was like, $100, so each one, and then knowing that what I was making on that baking sheet wasn't even enough, that like they would need more. So I didn't mind to do them because it was like, that was kind of me seeing those orders. Cause at that time, the fulfillment center was still packaging them up. You don't get to touch it and feel it. So it's even today, it's, it's really hard to understand, the the amount of customers, and looking through, and sometimes I like to just scroll through the shipping report, and seeing like each one of these is a household that, they got shipped an order yesterday. So that's really cool.
How did you find the like those partners? Like, how did you go? Because obviously, like with the package, your packaging is insane now. Like, you haven't even talked about like the design of that and why it's so Apple-esque when you pull it out, has that feel.
Yeah. I think we tomorrow we'll take a picture of it and include that.
I think everything happens for a reason, and I think that you need to, for people building a company, and how I did it from the very beginning was utilizing your network. If you know a guy that, and you can't, that's not always going to be the best. It's not always going to be the best, and the internet's so big now, and you can find so many people. So, I utilize my network. I knew a guy that did graphic design, but if you know someone that does really good work, like for example, you, Josh, me, being in Moorhead, and I knew that you did good work, and so I, reached out to you very early on to get you to help with, with everything from, instructional videos to whatever we were doing. So I think utilizing your network is very important. And really just kind of, seeing those opportunities and saying, you know what, like just keeping your eyes open, and if you think that there's an opportunity there, explore it and see, see where it could go. But utilizing your network is I think is in asking people. So you have a friend that's in whatever industry, and, hey, where do you, who do you use for your, whatever your signs, or, or your,
don't be scared to reach out and ask.
Yeah. Ask what, some of your friends that, that are in the industries or that have already done something, what they use. And then the internet, I mean, you can, so much nowadays is documented as far as, best, this and that, and lists. And so do the research and, see what's out there.
So I have another story I want to bring up, because I think that this kind of stuff matters. When you're talking about using your network, think about back when you had all the belts and buckles in storage that you weren't selling. Mm-hmm. So tell the story of Factory Seconds.
Yeah. So, gosh, we had issues where, with our manufacturer, we're so meticulous about what we put out. So, if there was a scratch, or if there was, anything wrong with the buckles or the straps, it really, we just didn't want to send it out, obviously, so, working through manufacturers, and anytime you're dealing with factories and things like that, you kind of have to train them on what's acceptable to you, because they will send you
whatever.
Yeah. I mean, and basically, they're not really at first, they're kind of feeling you out to what will they accept. And then, but they're really good about, making good on it. If you say, hey, I've got this many damages, then they're like, okay, well, we'll reimburse you for those. So, so early on we had, trouble with the factory, and we accumulated all of these Factory Seconds, which were great products, but they just had a tiny little scratch. It just things that, that they got pulled.
Just wouldn't meet your standard.
Yeah, they didn't meet the standards, but yet for, in 2 weeks, you wouldn't even know what, how it came. So, so Matt and his team kind of, had an idea to, to sell these Factory Seconds, to have this, Factory Second sale, and it absolutely blew it out of the water, and really, helped us in a time where we needed a boost, and, in preparing for, I think it was right, before Father's Day, and kind of, getting that inventory and everything. So it came at the perfect time.
Can you say how much you made off that?
I couldn't even remember. I mean,
Matt does. I bet Matt, how much did he make off that?
Right. It was good. All I remember is, because of the quality that he had always delivered, he was like, I don't know if we should sell this. Mm-hmm. And so we said, well, let's just do it this way. Let's divide up anybody who's bought 5 or more times, anybody who's bought 4 or more times, anybody who's bought 3 or more.
You know what? I forgot that's even how we did it.
Yeah,
and
so we sent an email to everybody that had bought 5 or more, and we actually put pictures of what they would be receiving.
I completely forgot that.
And said, hey, if...
Didn't compromise the brand.
No, and what we said is, hey, we know that these are Factory Seconds. Yep. Would you like to build out your selection by buying some of these? And I think we sent out, it was like 1,300 emails and got like 900 responses.
Yeah, it was something crazy.
It was ridiculous.
Yeah.
And so we're like, okay, this is a good idea.
Yeah.
And then at that point, he didn't know what the inventory was or anything. So it was like a mad dash for 4 weeks to like go get all the inventory counted. And then we had to put it on a page that nobody could see, because we didn't want to sell them on the site.
Yeah.
And we only wanted to show them to people who already knew the brand and what they stood for. And so there was all these steps, but then once we did it, it yeah, it was awesome. It was
we've done so much and gone through so much. I completely forgot that process. But I do remember that. I remember being really hesitant about putting a factory seconds. I was like, and this was before factory seconds really became, and now you see it with more brands. But I was really scared to, does that diminish the brand? Does that, but as long as you're very clear, then like your biggest fans are they're going to love it. And
that's who we asked first.
Yeah, exactly.
Great idea though.
Yes.
Like the way you thought about doing this
Absolutely.
versus like, we're not putting this on the page. We're not going to advertise this thing.
Yep.
We'll hit people that are
Yeah,
already
it's
in the
even
brand.
no
that loves
index
us.
because we had people trying to game it, and we were like, no.
Yeah. And you know what's funny though, and now we've done, after that we did some more factory second stuff years later, and now our factory's gotten so good we don't really get any. We haven't had them in years because we've kind of trained them, and they don't send us product that's damaged. But we did some research that and sometimes these factory seconds would end up getting on ads or something, or they would somehow be out there. But we looked at the data on first-time customers that had purchased that factory second, and then their lifetime value was huge. Yeah. And so, like, it was almost, toying with the idea of like, but you never want to give the customer, their first purchase. But
what it did is it built more trust because you were really, really clear,
absolutely,
about what you were sending
are.
and what you were getting. Yeah. And for them, they made that choice. You didn't make it for them. You didn't send it and go, oh, I hope they don't realize. And then we just get we'll send them a new one. But you said, hey, this is our standard. Mm-hmm. These don't meet it. And when you saw the email and saw the things that they were rejecting,
wow,
you're like, oh my, this is a whole nother level.
And a lot of it was just underneath the latch issues. And that was the biggest thing. I mean, it's underneath the latch.
On the backside of the belt.
It looked bad.
But I think it did so much more for your brand being premium because they're like, if they're this detailed about this and they get it, because you are meticulous about things.
Mm-hmm. But then they got to make the choice. Correct. Oh, I'll wear that anyways because nobody will ever see it. Yeah. But I got a great deal. I'm going to tell everybody about it.
Yeah. And then they get it probably, and they're like, what's wrong with this?
Some people are like, I can't
if I can't even tell just how good is the real product.
Exactly.
I mean, like how good is the one that I buy this brand new off the website if he's concerned about this.
Yeah, exactly. No, a lot of people couldn't even find the defect. So.
Yeah.
So today, Anson Belt, like where you're at today, like, what is it? Like, what is this beast that it is? Obviously, like you said earlier, you're never comfortable. You never feel like you made it.
Yeah.
But like, what is your current situation like? What are you doing on a daily?
Yeah.
What are you spending on a regular, like keeping this beast going?
Yeah. So, things have changed so much. I mean, we definitely still utilize, our influencers out there, and especially in our niche of men's fashion. But really what keeps the beast going is Meta and Facebook, Instagram, and really, a lot of advertising on those, because the reach is just absolutely astronomical, and you can't, to be in the way that it's changed so much even in the last 5 years.
Like for the layman people out there, Instagram ads.
So Facebook ads. And so, but it's changed so much even in the last, 5 years. And we were late to the game. If you were Facebook ads in 2015, 16, 17, like people were crushing it. Yeah. And they were, from the stories that I hear from back then, and the returns were just insane. And I wish that we had gotten into it and leaned into it heavier then. It was cheap, and not as many people were doing it. People didn't know how to do it. But nowadays, it's a lot less complicated as far as like Facebook's kind of doing what they want to do, and they don't even really tell you what they're doing. And they're putting it where they want to put it, whether it's Instagram or Facebook. And they're like, okay, your Advantage Plus shopping campaigns, and they're like, those are the best performing ones, and they just kind of place them where they want. But which it maybe works out better rather than trying to really kind of tool it down. But so right now, we're because of the sheer reach, investing heavily into that.
How many given campaigns do you have? How many ads do you have in any given day?
I mean, there's
like
six or seven different, depending on the funnel and the ads. But there'll be those 3 or so that like you really
kill it.
Yeah. I mean, and it's not even worth, I don't know, but you almost have to have, it seems like you have to have a few of them going, because you try to dump it all into one, and it doesn't like that.
And that's kind of where I'm going. Like, how did you get to there? Like, how did you get to there?
So, working with, with the gentleman that really, understands the ads. That's the biggest thing, is that I'm not doing the ads, and that's not my expertise. So, aligning yourself with a partner, with somebody that is an expert in that field, however large or small, I'm not saying, go out to a huge agency, or even just, a guy on Fiverr, but, which is like a, place that you can find, cheap work, for tasks. But, I think finding someone that knows what they're doing to help you get started in it, it is getting easier, so you can probably learn it. But I think, initially aligning yourself with somebody that, that knows what they're doing. And that's what we've done with any of our partners. We have a very, very small team, and that's probably something people are wondering is, how small are we? And really, I have, my two best friends that are my full-time employees, childhood best friends, John and Kenny, that, I grew up with since first grade, John since fourth grade. And then a lady that does nights and weekends part-time, customer service. And then I have a ton of strategic partners. And then my father, of course. So there's me, my father, and then my two best friends, and then Jennifer. So it's really, and my wife, of course. My wife is in the last year or so, year and a half, roughly, has really taken the reins on the Anson belt for her, kind of side of things, and that could be a whole podcast in itself. But we waited 15 years to do that, and that was on purpose. But and still really let her kind of have those reins, but as the kind of creative director for Anson belt for her.
What do you think it would cost today to scale a business to $1 million? So someone out there that started a business, and granted, this is like such a crazy open-ended question, because obviously it depends on what you're selling.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the margins.
But what could someone expect as far as sweat equity, monetary, like all these things? What do you think it would cost for someone that's all in to get somewhere like that, $1 million in revenue?
I mean, they're going to have to spend on digital advertising. And so, I think if you were, you're going to have to spend, and I don't even know if this is right. I don't even know, but I would say 20 to 25 grand or so, a month in digital advertising to hopefully, that's bringing you in over 100, as, starting small like that, you probably don't want to try to go to, that would hopefully, be profitable, that if you're bringing in over 100, but that's, that's hard to do. It's not to say if you spend the 25, you might do 50. You know what I mean? And that's the thing.
More realistic in the beginning.
What
are you trying to do? Are you trying to grow the customer base, or are you trying to make money?
Exactly.
And those are what we notice on the backside of all these businesses. The ones who actually grow quickly and then become very profitable, they're willing to spend money at break even, to get some sort of recognition, because people got to see you enough times to, again, like you said, swipe the credit card, which I've never thought about. Like what you said, you give your credit card to someone that goes away and walks away. I'm like, yeah, that's true. You do that all the time, and you have no idea where it went. But you feel insecure when you do it and you can see it. So I think that idea of making money on your advertising should come a little bit later. In the beginning, the people who are willing to go break even first always have a way greater percentage of success, because we've seen lots of people not make it, and we've seen lots of people that do make it. And the ones that make it and become good, stable businesses are willing to take less in the beginning. The people who feel like they deserve more, and like that entitled, oh, I'm spending this much, I better make this much, or else I'm not going to do it. Those people just don't last.
Yeah, I think you have to know what that, what can you spend to break even? Because you got to know, what is that point? What is that break even point where we're paying the bills, but we're not making any profit, and that happens a lot. But you're also getting that customer, so then you have to know what is that lifetime value of that customer, and you have to know your product as well. So if you have a product that people are only going to consume once, then you have to think a lot different on that. You can't really afford to lose money on the first sale, and you sometimes can't even afford to break even. But if you know that they're going to come back, so, for us, they buy one belt, they want another. They want another strap. They want another buckle. They want, multiples for different shoes and that kind of thing. But if you have something that they just get once, and the lifetime value is much lower, then you have to think about, you know, the ad spend a lot differently.
For you, when do you think someone listening to this and maybe they've spent a ton of money already, right? At what point do you listen to the market and close shop? Is there a dollar amount? Is there an analytic that you look at on your site? Man, I'm getting a ton of traffic. Like, and what is that? But like nothing converts. Someone that doesn't know that or have any comparable on that for others and what others are doing, what would you say on that?
You know, I think there's so many different parts of that as far as like, you know, if you know that you have a great product, but your site's broken, which can be totally a thing,
Yep.
then you need to fix the site, you know? So you have to believe in the product. You have to know that the product can work, you know, and not just hearing it from friends and family that are just going to take, oh, this is awesome. You know, like get some constructive, you know, criticism and feedback on it. But, you know, I think that it's all situational to what you can afford to do personally, you know? So, you know, how much can you afford to put into this and still not put yourself in a compromising situation financially, or, you know, that you're, you know, if you still have money coming in, but you're like, okay, this is something I'm really passionate about. I really believe in. So it's really kind of depends on people's personal financial situation and to what they can afford to put into it. Cause there's really, I mean, we were putting money into it for, you know, 5-7 years, you know, easy without getting much of anything back.
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, and that was a really long time. And I didn't get paid for, you know, probably, you know, 8 to 9 years, you know, I mean, like probably 8 years, you know, I mean, so it was only after, you know, I'd gotten laid off, and really, knew that was kind of the opportunity to jump headfirst into this. You know, my wife always told me, she said, you can't quit and you can't get fired. So I got laid off. And so, I knew that was my opportunity to dive into this head first. And it was kind of a sink or, you know, swim or sink kind of, you know, situation. And so I knew that was my opportunity to, okay, here we go. I wouldn't have been able to just quit my job. If I had said, hey, I'm going to quit my job and focus on Anson, I mean, I would have never been able to do that. But, you know, getting pushed off that cliff and said, okay, now I have to swim, and really dove in head first and really, try to make it work.
Do you enjoy the process? Do you enjoy the struggle? Do you enjoy like all those things? Because, you know, a 7-9 year process like you're talking about to become, you know, successful, and I think you'll be even more successful. But what part of like building a brand and all this other stuff do you think it's important for someone to really love the grind, like love the whole thing? Yeah,
absolutely. It you know, I still love creating, and so I love new products and you know, coming out with a new strap or a new material, and we're constantly adding new colors, and so, you know, for us, you know, I love doing that, and I love wearing I'll wear, and sometimes I should do a lot faster. Sometimes I wear a strap for a year before we'll ever put it out. And it's just me testing it and trying it. But I love creating. And so I think that if there's something within that business that you still get, you know, pure enjoyment out of, you know, and that can keep you going, you know, I think that's important. So for me, it's just the creating and still, you know, releasing new stuff. And that's what keeps it fresh. 'Cause, you know, it's been a long time, and we've been doing it a long time. So that's what really has kept me keeps it exciting for me. You know, is that kind of always releasing something new and kind of staying innovative within our niche. We have a very, you know, competitive niche, and I'm sure our competitors probably, they're, you know, eating their hearts out listening to some of this, and but it's like
good.
But but it's you know, it's very competitive, and you know, so for us to be able to, and I love seeing us launch something and then they follow behind a few months later. So, you know, that's something that I'm like, you know, I know that I'm doing it right when I see our competitors follow suit and try what we're doing, because they, you know, they either like it or think that we're, you know, killing it, whether we are or not with that thing, you know, they try it too. But yeah, I love creating, love bringing new products to the market.
Where, you know, kind of, where's Anson Belt going? Like, so thinking about the future, like where you're at, where you've been, like where are you going with this? Like, you know, what can people expect? Like, what do you expect?
You know, that's a tough question. I mean, where it's going, like I said, I want to make it a household name. I want, you know, when you think about a belt, you're not restricted to 5 holes. You know, you instantly think of an Anson belt and a micro adjustable holeless belt. And so to continue, I mean, we've touched just a fraction of the market and of the, you know, United States and worldwide. I mean, we've sold to like 100 and something plus countries. as well, which comes with the YouTube angle. So that's purely because of YouTube and all of those viewers from the influencers. But, we've sold internationally. That's not really where I'm looking to expand. I mean, that's definitely where a lot of businesses kind of looked, we need to go international. But I think we haven't even touched a fraction of the people in the U.S., men and women, and really looking to expand our women's market a lot. I think that a lot of women haven't worn, don't wear a belt or haven't worn a belt because there's not that kind of option. They don't, if they have a belt, it came from, H&M or, Forever 21 or something. And like it, with an outfit or, and it just only works with that one. But, I want to kind of change the way that, women are thinking about belts and styling, within their outfits. So that's a whole, and my wife, Kristen, is really taking, the reins on that. That's a part of the business I think really has a lot of potential to grow, but also just the men's side of getting the word out there to more people. We've, until you can walk into a room, of 50 people and, 40 of them have heard of us, I'm gonna still keep going. So
I have a question. We've talked about tons of the successful part of it, because you guys have done really well. Was there ever times when you thought to yourself, like, man, I don't know if I have what it takes to do this?
Yeah, I mean, there's been plenty of times where we, my dad's been ready to hang it up. I've been, I've kept believing, and not that he hasn't always believed, but he's kind of been like, look, this, if we're just not making the money. We're, like we gotta make some money, or else this isn't worth it. I got to do something else. And I think part of that was me having a job and having, my wife, having a great job. So it was, I think that security made that easier for me to say, let's stick with it, whereas he was ready to walk away. But as far as, I mean, there's still times where it gets really, even when you're, quote unquote successful or doing very well, there's times where, I mean, it gets tight, and especially when you're growing and you're trying to buy inventory, and you've got all these bills and you've got this overhead and, and so it's not easy. It's not easy today, it wasn't easy yesterday, and it's not gonna be easy tomorrow. So, to say it's all, rainbow and sunshine, like it's not, it's still a grind, and it's getting even harder, these days to really get out there. There's so much more noise and there's so many, more brands, and it's so easier to advertise. Everybody's doing it. So, yeah, I mean, it's still a, every day is, you're working to keep it going. And it's, you don't ever feel like you can just coast, or that, that like, hey, it's just gonna keep running itself. So, but as far as, yeah, I mean, just, I want to keep going, keep building that customer base, because we've seen the snowball effect of, once you start building customers, and especially if you have a product that, has a good lifetime value where they're coming back, then you can really build on that. And we see what, we had an incredible Christmas, and absolutely, I mean, that's a whole podcast in itself of what happened that, last Christmas. And, we were out of, buckles by December 16th. And when you don't have buckles, you don't sell many belts. And so it's like we were selling gift cards, for the rest of the year. But, we ran out and it was a complete nightmare, as far as the logistics of everything with the out of stocks and all of that. But it catapulted us this year, and it really, getting that many new customers is incredible for your business. And so we gained more new customers in that fourth quarter than we arguably maybe, and I would have to do the numbers in, almost the rest of the year. I mean, so that really shot us into, a successful 2023.
I like both of your guys' perspective and on the true value of building a customer base versus selling a product.
That's a big difference.
Like there's a huge difference in mindset with what you're just saying is, so when you're building a customer base, you're building loyalty, you're building a brand, like a brand will last. If you're just selling a belt buckle, I can go buy a belt buckle right anywhere, So your mindset behind the advertising of this, like you maybe don't even notice that you're saying it, but we spend all this money, tens of thousands of dollars at times, on advertising to build customer base, and then you're looking at the business as an overall for things that are coming in and how much we're making. and you're not really putting like every little dollar to each little belt, you're building customer base. If I'm building customer base, that's the metric I'm looking at for my businesses going in the right direction.
Yep, absolutely.
Because it's not that one sale, it's that next sale and that next sale.
Exactly.
And the next
you
sale.
have to know how many, and that's a metric that we look at every day is, how many new customers did we get yesterday and what's our new customer revenue? So you have to know that, what that percentage of new customer revenue is. And then, that if you get that, then, everything else falls in.
I feel like that's a luxury of a brand that's doing things right. But it should be what
it's been around for,
But I think that's something that people should long for that are starting a brand and doing things of, hey, I don't need to sell or try to get to a point where you don't have to sell this so you're eating tonight, right? If you got the side hustle, do the side hustle until you can say, I just want to build customer base. If I keep building customer base, I know there'll become a time where we're going to do this.
Exactly. Right? That foundation, you have to have the foundation. And then that just spreads word of mouth. So, our biggest advocate has been word of mouth advertising, and people, friends and family talking about it. So, you take care of that customer and you really do them right. Yeah. And have an exceptional product, then they will talk about it. And so, once you could break even on all those, but then they've told people and now that's free.
Yeah.
And so that, now when they come and buy, you haven't spent anything, besides what you did that first person that spread the word. But you essentially, you didn't have to spend on that marketing. So
yeah, just to tease everybody, rather than talk about it on this episode, I'd love to go into that post-purchase survey and talk about how you learned about your customer and what that's done to change.
Absolutely.
And how it's actually become profitable. So I remember when we were asking you for $2,000 to buy some data, and it was rough. We're like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And now that's turned into it's actually a profit center.
Yeah. Cool.
Absolutely.
All right. Finishing up, anything you think people should know if they're starting out or if they're already a big established brand, like any big takeaways that are the aha moments for you in life?
For one is start it. If you've got an idea, if you've got something that you're thinking about, you got to do it. So you got to take that step to, to actually, start doing it, take those baby steps. And then also, don't have a timeline into, it may take years, and for us and for many of the brands, if you talk to people that have successful businesses, it took them years and years, and that seems kind of daunting to someone starting it, but it's like, look, if you don't start it now, then, you're getting behind. And that's just that much longer you're going to have to wait, if you ever want to do it. So, for one is to do it. And I think that it's also important to be meticulous about, what you're putting into it, and how, for us, it was, I cared about every interaction and every, how every customer felt and every sale and, everything that we were doing from the packaging to the logo to everything, really put a lot of care into that. And so I think that when someone does that with a brand, then it's going to be successful, more so than if, they don't really care about the details. They're just trying to sell it, so.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks for sharing.
That was it.
Yeah. Thank you guys.
Thanks for ending.
I'd say thanks for having me, but I'll be back.
Thanks for having us in your place.
Yeah, excited about this.
Yeah, we're glad he could join us in his place today.
Yeah. No, I'm actually very excited about this because I learned a lot just listening to you. Like when you said, "Oh, I forgot about that."
Yeah, I'm sure there's plenty of things that you on your end you were dealing with, and I've got so much else going on. And we really need to look back and even have Alex on one time or something.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because he cares about the brand just as much as you.
Well, it was amazing because he was a fan of the brand before we even started working together. And then when you mentioned Anson Belt, and he was like, wait, I know those guys.
Yeah,
and so,
I want to work on that brand.
Yeah, so he wanted, so it really was, that was really cool.
Yeah.
Reputation precedes you.
No, thank you.
All right, so next time we'll talk about the post-purchase survey because I think that's something that whether you're a big brand or a small brand, you do that. Like it's crazy the amount of insight that you get, and they're telling you what they want naturally.
Yep.